Hey everybody, here look at this Dell Dimension E510 desktop computer, and I want to talk about the cooling system on it. I made a video before about this same exact computer, and it was really just a general video for those who own Dells that had the intake on the front like this for the CPU cooling portion of the machine. And the video is about how easy these things here can clog up. And of course, obviously this computer sits on a carpeted floor, and as you can see, it is slammed full of dust. But that's not exactly what I'm talking about in this video. But what's one thing to keep in mind is make sure you keep that cleaned out, so that way the system can get plenty of air. And especially if it's a small form factor Dell, because those are more or less toaster ovens for the electrolytic capacitors inside of them. Now let's go ahead and have a look in here. Of course, the motherboard looks healthy, no bad capacitors or anything. But something I want to point out right here with these Dells. I see many Dells in the BTX form factor that'll have this big old shroud here and a very small heatsink. Well, not exactly very small, but you might be able to see there's a big gap here. And of course there's a big old 120mm intake fan back here that blows air across the heat pipe cooler. And there's a really big flaw with this design here. This big old opening here will allow air to pass through freely without even going to the cooler. I mean, think about it. It's pretty much common sense. Is the air going? Which way is the air going to go? Is it going to force itself through these fans, or is it going to take the free road? And of course, when the air takes a free road around the cooler, this here will get much hotter, and of course the fan itself back here will speed up real fast because the CPU is getting really hot. And I hear, and I mean, it's pretty common with these Dells to have them sitting on the floor, and you run something CPU intensive, these things will start sounding like little jets because all the air is flowing through this free opening here instead of flowing through the cooler. So what we got to do here is take some electrical tape and tape this down to where the air has no choice but to flow through the heat pipe cooler. We'll also have to tape up these holes here. This here is for where, let's say, a big heat pipe cooler would have been installed. More or less, Dell uses the same shroud for almost all of their BTX machines. I mean, common sense would say make some sort of smaller shroud for the small heat sinks and make a large shroud for the big heat sinks. Gateway's design is much better than this. If you look at a Gateway BTX machine, you'll see there's like a little flap that actually stays up against the heatsink, so that way the air coming from the 120mm fan has no choice but to blow across the heatsink, or through, I should say. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and tape this up and I'll show you the end result. Okay, I just now applied the tape, and here's how it looks. More or less what I try to do is cover up every little hole where air could escape. Now let's have a look here. And you might be able to see I put plenty of tape here to cover up this big gap. I put some tape around here to cover up this gap, and some tape here to cover this gap. So now the air has no choice but to flow through the cooler, and not around the cooler, not over the cooler, not out through the side of the shroud. Just cool the CPU like it's supposed to. It's a pretty simple fix. Anyway, any questions or comments, feel free to ask.